Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Church Leadership Lab, where our goal is to have conversations that help empower healthy churches. We are thankful that you are here, and we're excited today to have a conversation with Mike Minter. Mike was the founding pastor of Reston Bible Church in Northern Virginia, where he and his wife Kay served for 47 years faithfully. And after a long, faithful vocation as a pastor, Mike has a burden to help younger pastors navigate the turbulent waters of ministry. And so he's here to chat about that. He's the author of Stay the Course, A Pastor's Guide to Navigating the Restless Waters of Ministry. Serves as an associate teaching pastor at Rolling Hills Community Church, so still involved in ministry. And as mentioned above, is married to Kay, and they have 4 adult children, Kelly, Megan, Katie, and David, and an ever-growing number of grandchildren. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Look forward to it. Always enjoy these.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one question we ask everybody that I'd love to start off with. I know I just read kind of the big picture bio, the public bio, but there's always something that doesn't make that all your friends and family would know. So what's something for you that doesn't make the public bio, but all your friends and family would know about you?
I think most people, if you're around me very long, know that I'm an extremely curious person.
Okay.
Everything, if I look up at the ceiling, I'll go, I wonder how they did that crown molding. I wonder how every single thing that I look at in life, I want to know how it works. Though I'm not good at working with, I'm not good with my hands, but I'm interested in knowing how the thing works. And It's like that my mind is racing all the time.
Now I'm curious, is that funny? I just said, I'm curious. I'm curious. Has that curiosity, has it ever gotten you in trouble? Like, I wonder how that works. And you start to dive into it and then realize I just broke it. It doesn't work anymore.
Well, curiosity killed the cat, it says, So yeah, I think there have been times, and I've probably extended things a little bit too much in digging into something and found I think I'm over my head and I probably shouldn't have gone down this rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But it's just always there. It's
nice.
Just even talking to you right now, I'm thinking, how do you operate all that? How does that work? And even if you explained it to me, I probably wouldn't understand, but I'm still fascinated with, and now they've got this AI stuff that's coming out that I don't understand that at all. So there's just a lot of things that I'm just fascinated with.
I love that. I think that there's a zeal in that carries you through all sorts of seasons. So, well, our conversation today is really going to center around what does it look like to stay the course in ministry. We have plenty of statistics, numbers, stories of especially in the last 3 to 4 years of people leaving ministry, of stepping out of that. Some of that can be healthy and good, but some of it can be really challenging and difficult and maybe not the best move. And so, I do think it's fair to say we've seen maybe an unprecedented number of pastors and church leaders leaving the ministry. So from your viewpoint, what you've seen and what you've walked through, what do you think is causing this? Are there maybe some common root causes?
Yeah, there really are. As a matter of fact, I wrote down some thoughts. If you go back and you think of the early church, 15, 20 people meeting in a home, and then you look at the church today, we've got the same, we have to deal with the same things that a business deals with. We got to follow the rules, the government rules, the local regulations. We got to run the building properly. We got to have the fire marshal come. We got all that. Plus, we have a little bit of a higher ethical standard than the general work world. We also have a higher moral standard. The work world doesn't care what you're doing after work, what you're looking at, or whatever. We do, all right, as a church. Then you add to that doctrine. Google doesn't have a doctrinal statement. All right. I don't think they do. Okay.
Yeah.
They're not, I don't know whether they're premillennial or amillennial, but at any rate, they probably don't care. Then you add to that music. Businesses don't worry about what music's being played. And that's just a slight issue in churches today, in case you hadn't figured that out, being a worship leader.
Yeah.
Then here's an interesting one. We are paid by the people to tell them how bad they are every week. That's a very strange thing. It's just a strange thing. We're to reprove, to rebuke, to exhort. Then our lives have to be above reproach, and that adds to it. And then I think what's really changed today is the immediate criticism that can come at the speed of light over your internet. I didn't like your message this past week. Everybody says it was terrible. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so pastors are dealing with more immediate criticism than they ever got before. And along with trying to juggle all the plates of a large church and things growing, it's a very different dynamic than it was when I started Reston Bible Church. Very, very different. And I'm watching pastors literally, they've almost got to be tech experts, and they've got to know everything about everything. And it's overwhelming, particularly if you don't have that skill set. So that's what I'm seeing a lot of.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. I think that the way that, obviously, if you just step back and look at the way our culture has changed in the last 30, 40, 50 years is significant. But then to see how ministry has changed with that, without maybe changing then some of the expectations, some of the, here's everything on a pastor's plate, here's what you have to do. I mean, it creates this sense of, how do you do all of that well? And even like you said, in business, well, typically people aren't hired to be the CEO, the chief marketing person, the HR person, go down the list. You hire somebody to do a certain role because that's what they're good at. But yeah, it seems like in the church, it's do all of it and also do all of it extremely well.
Really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think those are expectations that people often put on a pastor. And if you don't have a really good team around you, particularly if your church is fairly large, and Reston Bible Church was a pretty sizable church. And it took me a long time to realize that in the hiring process, it wasn't so much getting the skill set, though you needed that.
Yeah.
It was making sure that the person that you bring on is a humble person. We brought on people that were very prideful, very difficult to get along with, really knew their stuff, but just left in their wake nothing but caustic comments and difficulties and everything else. So it took me a long time to realize I'm going to hire humility over ability. You need both. But and so I was able to leave on a really good note. We just had a fabulous staff and elder council, just a great group of people that were humble. And so I was able to leave on a really good note. So those are key factors today. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, especially as you talk about church staff, if you have that humility piece, that means even the things you don't know, or maybe the skills that you haven't learned or grown into, you can have a humility to receive that feedback and also receive coaching and then actually step into that, versus when there's maybe a wall that, arrogance and pride can create. It's sort of like, why I got to figure it out. Why should I listen to you? So that's really good.
And that does happen. A lot of times people will think I'm a notch above where you are in this particular area. Then you've got competition, which creates conflict. And that doesn't help matters any. So you really have to have somebody that's sort of at the head of, like if it's a large church, an executive pastor that can really minimize a lot of that and kind of knows what's going on. And we had a guy back home, we have one here that just really great at dealing with things quickly and knowing how to handle the conflict and so on. So when I look at pastors dropping out, they years ago, you didn't have to deal with the internet. You didn't have to deal with comparisons.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I can go listen to John Piper. I can go listen to Andy Stanley. I can go listen to whoever, and you ain't close to where they are in your communication skills or your knowledge or whatever. And so that's another factor. A lot of people just stay home and watch those guys send in their tithe to their local church, but they're not really connected. Then the pastor feels minimized and doesn't feel like he's really contributing because he knows he can't compete, and we're not supposed to be competing. But the internet's not helping in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm curious your thoughts on the warning signs that might be there for church leaders. So I hopefully some are listening who might be at that spot of thinking, man, maybe it's time. Given everything we just talked about, they're like, I know that reality. I live in that day in, day out, week in, week out. And maybe they're listening to this. Are there some warning signs that they can look for that they may be venturing into unhealthy territory? Maybe not only just how they're looking at ministry, but also just their heart, like where they're at. Can pastors look for certain things in their heart and life that can maybe serve as, warning lights on the dashboard, so to speak?
Yeah, I think there are. And I think I had that happen to me about 23, 24 years ago.
Mm.
Not only was I exhausted, and we'd been through a lot of really difficult things in the church, but I started feeling inadequate. And I thought, and I actually went into the elders and I handed in my resignation letter. And the guy that ran the elder council says, "Thanks, Mike," tore it up and says, "We got work to do." And just kept on moving. I think deep down, I knew they were going to talk me into staying, but it was probably my way of whining. The warning lights can certainly be exhaustion. The warning lights can be feelings of insecurity. The warning lights can be, I can't live up to the expectations that people have. All right. But I think you always have to go back to the fact, was I called to this? 1 Thessalonians 5:24, I think it is. His callings are his enablings. Oh, if I'm called to this, then I'm not doing it. He's the one that's got to do it. I think it's 1 Corinthians 15:10, where Paul says, "I labored more than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God did the laboring." And if you look at Paul's ministry in comparison to the struggles we're going through, really small.
Yeah.
Just go back and read 2 Corinthians 11 and 12. I think you'll see something about Paul's life.
Yeah,
so,
not many of us have been shipwrecked,
beaten and everything else. So I think we need to realize we are at war. We're a target. Our people are not always, or at least some people are not always going to love us. We've also got to not exaggerate in our minds when 3 people didn't like our sermon and we think everybody doesn't like it. I did that a lot. I always thought that, well, that must represent the entire church or what have you. And it didn't. And so I could play those little scenarios, those little videos in my mind, which we all do. We've really got to get back to the basics of the gospel. Was I called to this? Is this my life's calling? God never said it would be easy. He said it would be hard. It is. And it soon will be over one of these days. In this life, we're going to have tribulation. Be of good cheer. So I think that those are factors, but there are warning signs when the exhaustion takes in. That's the time when you need to go sit down with your leadership team and say, I think I need a break. 3 months, couple of months, month, whatever it happens to be. I just need to get recharged. And there are places you can go. There are places where they have pastors that help pastors, various places around the country where a pastor can go for a while and really unload with what he's experiencing, because almost every pastor is experiencing the same thing. Yeah. Not a whole lot of difference.
I'm curious, that situation where you handed in your resignation letter and you said, "Thanks, Mike," and tore it up. Did you kind of have like, how did you maybe get to that, past that point of saying, yeah, I think I'm done with this, and then back into a spot of, because obviously you ministered for a number of years after that, back into a spot where you felt like, okay, I have a little bit more juice in the tank now?
Yeah. I think what happened was when I turned it in, there's a little bit of a story behind all of it. We had an enormous mega church move their main campus fairly close to us, and they had every imaginable thing you could. If you had red hair and fungus on your toenails, they had a ministry for you, And when they moved into their new facility, we were in the process of trying to even raise money for a facility. We lost 1,000 people in about a 3 or 4 month period.
Wow.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I thought we were going to capsize. I thought, I'm just not leading well. The giving didn't go down at all. And the church kept right on cruising. We gained people back. And that's when I began to realize that, this is God's church. And I have to be reminded of that a lot. I used to have a guy on staff. No, he was just a good friend. He wasn't on staff, but he knew when I was down. Every once in a while, he'd take me out to lunch. He'd go, "All right, what's wrong now?" And I would tell him, and I would say, "I just don't feel like I." And he'd go, "Can I remind you, whose church is this?" He always used to look at me, and I'd say, "Well, it's Jesus's church." "Well, it doesn't sound like it. It sounds to me like you think it's your church." And he would always bring me back down to the reality that God didn't say, "Mike will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." It's Jesus. That's his job. And I think sometimes we fail to realize that our job description is not his job description. And his job description is to do the building and all those. Our job description is to simply follow him, to yield to what we know to be true, to stick to the truths of the gospel, preach the word, and let him do what he does, which is the miraculous. I can't do that. All right. I can remove the stone and I can remove the grave clothes, but I can't call Lazarus to life. Yeah. So that's kind of how you just have to be reminded of the basics almost every day.
Yeah. You said something in that story that stuck out to me, and it was the friend that you had who knew you well enough to go, okay, some things, Mike's not feeling great. Like we gotta grab lunch or something. What role does friendship play for pastors? Because I know that one thing I've experienced, and I know many others have, is that ministry can be pretty lonely, and deep, vulnerable, honest friendships can be rare. So what role has that played maybe in some of your longevity in ministry? And then what advice would you give to pastors who might be feeling like, I just don't have friends?
Yeah. I've talked to pastors. I know some pastors that say, I don't think you should have friends in the church. I'm not in agreement with that. I think you need friends that are in the church, and I think you need friends that are in leadership in the church. You've got to have some go-to people. You have to. I always had people that could see me from different angles. The person that's on staff with me that knows my staff style, and people that are outside but know me well over a cup of coffee or dinner. And getting the different perspectives from the person in the pew to the person on staff or the elder, and how they perceive you. But again, pastors are wired differently. I'm an off the charts extrovert, so I like being around people. I know people that I just want to sit in my little cubby hole and meditate on my navel or something. I don't care how you're wired. I mean, we're wired for people.
Yeah.
We're wired for fellowship. We're wired for friendship. And I think people need to find somebody they really trust, that they've known for a long time, and say, could we grab coffee every 2 weeks or whatever? And I've done that for years and years and years with people that I had a great respect for, and they knew me well, and they could speak into my life, and they could ask me any question they wanted about anything, my marriage, my kids, anything, where there could be a vulnerability. And I think that really helped me see things that I couldn't see. There's always those blind spots. And people would bring those out, and I would realize these are some mid-course corrections I just have to make. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't have lasted more than about 3 or 4 years. Yeah. I would have just literally dried up and died. But I had so many great people that came along and took a few bullets for me along the way as well.
Yeah. I actually wonder too if that's a big part. I think in general, forming friendships, relationships is increasingly challenging in how much we live on our phones and social media, and the right. Faux connection that we all feel, which isn't real. I think that's made forming friendships difficult in general. I think ministry adds a whole nother layer onto it. But I think that I just want to I think that's a massive piece of longevity, is having people, especially as somebody who you in ministry, you planted a church, and, for anyone who were stand back and look, we go, well, that was a huge success. Planted a church, grew, continued to grow. You grew to a large point of, to where then you pastored it faithfully. And so everyone would look back and go, wow, that's what I want, or that's what I want to see if God would do that. But it's interesting how you had people who could hold you accountable and sit down and maybe didn't look at you as, Mike, the pastor of Reston Bible Church, this, large church, but just knew you as their buddy Mike, who could say, hey, you're out of line here, or, what's going on here.
Yeah. If you see and all of us have seen every year 2 or 3 big names that have fallen, there's been some common denominators. And that is, none of those guys had any accountability, or they didn't have anybody they were really close to. They were gifted communicators and gifted leaders. And if you've got those 2 gifts, you're going to have a big church. But many times that would go to their heads. They thought they could control everything. And eventually you develop a caustic environment. And then all of a sudden people are leaving. There's a situation right now going on where they're investigating a certain pastor of a large church over a caustic environment. And this is going to take place over and over again. And I think it's just important that you have some people on your staff that are really close to you that can pull you aside and say, I think the way you're leading right now is causing some confusion. Or I think you need to clarify this to the staff. Or I think you need to clarify this to the elders. We brought on an executive pastor about 6 years ago who is so gifted, and he began to realize the elders had one set of information in their leadership, and the staff had a different set, and we weren't connected. We weren't mad at each other, but there was a little friction here and there. So every single Tuesday, he would get up and say, here's what we discussed at the elders meeting last week. Any questions? Then he would go to the elders and say, here's what the staff discussed. Any questions? Everything went well.
Yeah.
Great communication and seeing how to meld those 2 together, which I think is a huge skill to have a guy do that. And I think it really helps in keeping a caustic environment from developing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what are some other, we talked about friendship, but what are maybe some other regular rhythms that you'd recommend pastors maintain to maybe avoid getting to that spot where it's like, man, I've gone on long enough and now I need some drastic measures. What are some regular rhythms that pastors and church leaders can have to be healthy and to stay healthy?
Well, certainly the basics. I mean, your time in prayer, your time in the Word. I also think there needs to be some solitude. We talk about Jesus going off and praying and that. I think today there is a busyness. There's that cell phone that is always dinging you for the next thing. And I don't think pastors keep a real close eye on their own solitude, their own quietness. If you go back and you look at church history, you read a lot about some of the sometimes mystics, but there were times that these people would get away and really contemplate the things of God, the gospel, the power of the Word. And right now, you can be going just all the time and never setting aside time. I had a pastor friend of mine up at our last church, and he used to say, if the phone would ring or something, get a hold, he would say, I'm in a meeting right now. And I'm saying, well, who are you meeting with? I was meeting with God.
Yeah.
And I'm not lying when I say I'm in a meeting. It's the most important meeting. And he would use that to say, don't bother me in this hour or whatever. That was his response. And he set that time aside every single day to develop some real quietness and solitude in his own heart, to quiet his heart. Because you're going to come across some things. We had about 6 years ago, within a 1.5 year period, it was either 3 or 4 suicides, a murder, and a moral fall on somebody on staff. And I was trying to navigate those waters.
Wow.
I thought I was going to die. The beauty of having really good people that are willing to look at you and say, we don't want you taking all that on. We're going to assign this elder to that. I had one guy that I was just on the phone with the other day, still lives up in Northern Virginia. Every time he would take bullets for me. If he knew people were after me, he'd go visit them. He would take the bullet. He would take the hit. And I'm forever grateful for this guy because it was almost like a shield. He would just step in the way and handle it. You have to have some of those people too. No pastor can handle the onslaught of everything that goes on in ministry. You simply can't. And you've got to have really quality people around you that are gifted in different ways. Some people are really good at going in and solving a conflict. Some people are great at going to the hospital. Some people are good at whatever, encouraging people. And knowing where those people are in your congregation are the people you want to surround yourself with when you're starting to feel really defeated. And you just say, hey, could you handle this? Our chairman of our elder council back home loved to go into conflict. He loved it because he was so kind. And he could walk into a room and just everything was deflated immediately. It was his manner. He just had a way of just calming people's hearts, walking through their problems. And so he enjoyed that because he saw that as his ministry.
Yeah.
Whereas he wasn't interested in causing more conflict or stirring things up. He could come in and really settle things down. I love that guy because he went into a lot of conflicts from Mike. I'll take care of that. You know how I love that.
That's a gift.
Go get him.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I know you express in your book is that in this season of life that you're in now, you're really wanting to shepherd shepherds. So be a pastor to pastors. Our audience is primarily all church leaders and pastors. And so what would you say to a pastor right now who's wounded, who's limping, who's maybe on the edge of leaving ministry altogether?
First, you have to ask yourself some hard questions. What is the wound? What's causing the limp? You have to identify that. Is it you're just plain tired? Or is it criticism? Is it you're working too hard? You have to identify what that is, that thing that's draining the life out of you. Too many meetings, whatever it happens to be. And if you have a real small church, the dimensions and the problems you have there are very different than a pastor that has a very large church.
Yep.
And somebody that's in between. I think Tim Keller did something on this years ago. He talked about a church of 100, 250, and 500 and so on. I don't recall all the details, but Keller's a pretty insightful guy. And as I looked through the different stages of our growth, I had different needs at different times. And my limp was different, very different. In the very, very beginning, I didn't have a staff. So my limp was racing to solve every single problem in the church and teaching Sunday school and Wednesday night and da-da-da-da. And all. I was dying, all right? When the church got bigger, my limp was different. The pain was different. It was, who do I bring on to help solve these problems? And are they going to be a direct report to me? And is that my skill set, handling direct reports? Or do I bring on an executive pastor that does that? I had to work around my strengths and weaknesses. So I'll throw this out. I was never a visionary and never a gifted leader. I was a teacher. God gave me an ability to communicate, and that was my thing. Put Mike in the pulpit and let him go. But I'm a people person, so I always got along well with the staff and the leadership and the people in the church. But to cast a vision, my casting vision is what I'm having for lunch. That's it. My pastor that I'm with right now will cast a vision 27 years out. I mean, he just thinks vision all the time. So we're very, very different. And he loves having me on staff because I can fill in places that is not his great strength, but he is a great visionary, great leader. Mine was strictly teach the Bible. And that drew people. But then I had to figure out how you deal with all the people that were coming in. Yeah. And I loved it, but I knew what my limp was. I knew that my limp was never going to be casting vision, but I better find out somebody who can. It was never going to be great leadership and deciding on we're going to go in this direction or that direction, but I better find out somebody who can. So I was never a black and white kind of guy. I was never a real hard-nosed, kind of a pastor. Pretty easygoing, too easygoing. I let some things go too long that only I really should have dealt with. And that caused some problems. Looking back, I should have nipped a lot of things in the bud, but I didn't. But that's water under the bridge. So I would say you have to really identify. Might take 2 or 3 days to get away and say, What's eating at me? And have I exaggerated my problem? Am I really that terrible of a person or preacher or whatever? But you've got to identify the problem. And then you need to probably sit down with somebody that can help you walk through that problem. It could be a professional counselor, Christian counselor, somebody on the staff, pulling 2 or 3 people together that know you well to say, here's what I'm going through. Tell me what you think. And they might say, I don't see that in you at all. Where'd you get that from? We bring on a lot on ourselves that are not true. We take on identities that are not true.
Yep.
We have to be careful with that.
Well, especially as you mentioned, and it's common. I mean, there's even some statistics of typically it's 3 to 4 people, the who are maybe the loudest at times, who can bring about the criticism, who sometimes can be the reason a pastor leaves a church. And sometimes those voices get really loud, and then those help launch other narratives in our head around things that may not be true, but it's a challenge to navigate those. And usually the people who are in your corner, loving everything going on, are silent. And so that can be a challenge to deal with those narratives.
A great insight, because I went through that 20 some years ago. There were 4 people that were they were convinced that I was trying to be the next Protestant Pope or something. They thought I was controlling, it wasn't even my personality, but they were convinced of it. So I convinced myself that they were going to destroy the entire church. And we eventually had to ask them to leave, and it caused all kinds of problems. We had to keep meeting with them. Now, a really strong pastor would say, see ya, and keep on moving. I kept wanting to reconcile, and it was unreconcilable. I began to realize they were never going to reconcile. But I played the video in my mind that the entire church is going to fold up and they're all going to leave, or half are going to leave. I think we lost 5 people. And I spent 4 years in that fight.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pastors can really play that card.
Yeah. Well, this is I think this is invaluable wisdom for the pastors and church leaders listening, because these are very real struggles and difficulty, and they'll continue. One question we ask everybody on the show, again, our goal is to empower healthy churches. So we'd love to hear the answer to this question. So I'd love to hear what you have to say around what is one essential component of a healthy church.
I would say, I without hesitation, humility. Humility. Because everything flows out of that. And this is what I love about our present pastor. The man is a humble man. And it flows right down into the staff. It's a humble staff. Nobody is out there trying to be the guy or trying to draw attention.
Yeah.
And he's done an amazing job of developing that. And when you've got a humble staff and humble leadership, you have very little friction. You'll have some, but very little. So it's got to start with the leadership. Finding people that are willing to admit faults, willing to accept criticism, that are teachable, open to learning. That will make for a healthy church. But if you've got somebody at the top that's caustic, I don't care how big the church is, I can tell you that there's going to be a lot of turnover on staff, and there are problems behind the scenes that you cannot see, but eventually you'll see it.
That's really good. Well, I love if we could jump into what we call our final 5. These are a little more rapid fire, and so we'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on these. The first one is one book that you'd recommend to church leaders, and if you don't, I will recommend your book. But so you can do a different one if you want, but I'll definitely recommend yours. So one book you'd recommend to church leaders.
I would say A Most Dangerous Calling by Paul Tripp. Great book on ministry. Paul, very insightful guy, very prolific guy. We've had him come to our church speak a few times. I don't know Paul well, but I've been out to dinner with him a couple of times. But he writes, he's very, very precise. He really gets really into the heart a lot. I think that was one of my favorite books that I've read. But I've read things by Keller. I think the City Church and some other things that he's written. Those are always good, good books.
Nice. All right. What is the last thing that you listened to, whether that was an album, a record, a podcast, an audiobook?
Well, I'm not a real tech guy, but I love to listen to a group called City of Light.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
I love listening to them. So if I go on, I'll put them on and listen to their music. They've got some good stuff.
Yeah, nice.
Really good stuff.
Now you just said you're not a tech guy, so this question may not, you may not have an answer, but what's your favorite piece of technology if you have one?
I have to use my cell phone. And there are things about it that I like. I like being able to get a hold of my kids and their people, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, we'll often say, you spent this much time on your phone. And I'm thinking, come on, I did not. And then I realized I did. So it was interesting. There's a church in the area here that is trying to get everybody to detox for like a month on their phone or their technology, just trying to really cut down. And they had a little video clip, and it showed somebody holding a cell phone. And the cell phone was connected. The veins from the cell phone ran into their veins in their arm. It was graphic. And then it opened up the phone, and it showed all these people inside of a prison walking around with their striped suits. So yeah, I like it, but it's the enemy. Anything that we invent, the enemy will use it for evil. We can use it for good. We have to be careful how we're going to use it. Yeah,
that's a really good word. And I don't think you're the only one who sees that screen time and is like, that must be wrong. Yeah, that's not wrong. What is a quote or advice that has stuck with you over the years?
I had a teacher in Bible college that said, our lives should be so above reproach that if anyone were to criticize us, those who know us well wouldn't believe it. That's a great line.
That's really good.
And I've thought about it often.
Yeah, that's really good. All right, last one. What is one thing that you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders?
I would like to communicate the fact that if you find yourself thinking, I think I need to leave, I would encourage you to not make any impulsive decisions, no matter how overwhelmed you feel. I would set some time aside to reflect. I would sit down with some people that are good friends of yours. I would walk through what you're going through. Let them pick it apart a little bit, because they might see some exaggerated things in your life that you're making up, an identity that you've taken on that isn't true. If you can find a really good Christian counselor, that certainly helps. But also be looking forward, or at least looking ahead a little bit at some of the things. It could even be you're not there yet, you're not thinking of leaving, but you're looking at a few little things on your dashboard that are blinking, and you begin to realize, now what's that about? Am I exhausted? Am I tired in this area? What? And you can also be a little overly confident. Maybe your church is one of those churches that's just exploding. You're one of those guys that started in a garage, and 3 weeks later you're meeting in an auditorium of 3,000 people. One of those guys. You got to be very, very careful about praise. The stage or the auditorium, whatever, can be a very, very seductive, very seductive.
Yeah.
And so you have to be very, very careful, even in the time of praise. It isn't just a time of criticism. It's a time of praise that you got to be really careful.
Yeah.
I would leave that with any of the leaders out there.
That's really good. That's a good note for us to end on as well. Mike, I appreciate you sharing your wisdom, sharing your experience, sharing what you've seen from ministry, and just want to thank you as well for the example that you are to the many church leaders listening who, like you said, unfortunately, we have a lot of examples of those who maybe haven't made it. And obviously those get a lot of attention. But there's a lot of folks like you as well who have just been faithful and have served, and it hasn't been easy, and you've had really hard seasons, but you've kept going. And I just want to thank you for the example that you are.
Well, thanks, Scott. I appreciate you having me on. I love this. Any way I can help a pastor, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'll do anything I can.
Well, I love that. And I would encourage everyone listening or watching to get Mike's book, Stay the Course, A Pastor's Guide to Navigating the Restless Waters of Ministry. We'd highly recommend that to you. And we want to thank you for listening or watching. We hope that this has been helpful. And if it has, we'd encourage you to share it, whether that's on social media, texting it to a friend, leaving a comment, a review, subscribing. That helps us help more church leaders and pastors and helps us get this content out to more people. And so we would appreciate that. And we thank you again for joining us. And we encourage you to join us again as we continue to have conversations to empower healthy churches.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.